If you don't mind, sir, please step out of the car. It was an order, but politely given. The white policeman remained polite, but there was a firmness in his voice that showed that he wouldn't take any shit. He tripled with shout out, man. My favorite book, Midnight, by Sister Soldier Read by you. Thank you. Stash and Dough. Thank you for coming out. Appreciate you. One of the officers opened the car door and began probing around in. Wait, I'm sorry. But there was a firmness in his voice that showed he wouldn't take any shit. He wouldn't take any shit. If there was one thing Chester Hines had learned when he was a young man in his early 20s, it was not to get smart with the police. Something he had learned from experience. One of the officers opened the car door and began probing around inside the car. Seconds later, he straightened up, and in his hand was the pistol Chester had tried to conceal. Just a heads up, your mom is expecting the baby. After I saw her last night, I didn't pull out quick enough. See what I'm saying? Fuck you, Tony the Tiger. All right. This book is for Shirley Saylor, whose love and infinite patience helped me to keep the faith and to make my editorial deadline. For the Charles and Carol Cunningham family, without whose kindness and help the pages of this novel will still be stuck in my typewriter. And for my publisher and editor, whose help and kindness I doubt I'll ever be able to repay in full. To all of them, my gratitude and thanks. An angry preface. Would you rather watch a tree grow or a Negro? Yeah, come watch me. Learn to read, alright? An angry preface. Since this work of fiction deals with the court system, I'd like to direct the reader's attention to an awesome abuse inflicted. I'd like to direct the reader's attention to an awesome abuse inflicted daily upon the less fortunate, the poor people of this country, the poor people of this country, an abuse with no statement, an abuse which no statement, judge, or attorney an abuse which no statement, judge, or attorney, to my knowledge, has moved to effectively remedy. I'm speaking of the bail bond system. How are you sick? It's summer. Okay. You gotta get the fuck out of here. You stupid people. All right? How am I sick? Hey, Vic Boy, salute to you. All right, let me start this over. All right? An angry preface. Since this work of fiction deals with the court system, I'd like to direct the reader's attention to an awesome abuse inflicted daily upon the less fortunate, the poor people of this country. An abuse with no statement, An abuse where no statesman, judge, or attorney, to my knowledge, has moved to effectively remedy. I'm speaking of the bail bond system. Each day, hundreds or even thousands of poor blacks and whites are picked up, arrested, booked, and held in county jails all over the country until their court dates are set. The courts are glutted, and the rights of the citizen to a speedy hearing or trial are denied, owing largely to the staggering number of cases with which the courts must deal. There are cases of people, many of whom were found innocent of the charges for which they were arrested, spending more than a year in county jails simply because they couldn't raise bail money. And those who are lucky enough to raise bail bond money will never get it back, even if their cases are eventually thrown out of court or if they are tried and found innocent. Because of the overzealousness or stupidity and, let's be honest, bigotry of some law enforcement officers, countless numbers of poor persons have to pawn their belongings, sell their cars, or borrow money from finance companies, another high interest bill they can't afford, to regain their freedom so that they can, hopefully, stay gainfully employed, only to be found not guilty as charged when their cases come up in court. Still, the poor bastards are out here several $100s they can ill afford for being falsely arrested. And to poor persons, several $100s represents months of food and shelter. I'm not speaking for those who are caught breaking the law. I'm speaking for the people who are picked up on the streets or stopped for minor traffic violations and who are taken to jail on trumped up catch-22 charges simply because the arresting policeman doesn't like their skill. Thank you, by the way. I'm not speaking for those who are caught breaking the law. I'm speaking for the people who are picked up on the streets or stopped for minor traffic violations and who are taken to jail on trumped up catch-22 charges simply because the arresting policeman doesn't like their skin color or the way they walk or talk or dress or wear their hair. The cities should be made to reimburse those falsely accused. They should be made to pay the bail bond. They should be made to pay the bail bondsman's fee for those fortunate few who somehow raised the money for a bond, and they should be made to make monetary compensation to those who spent days, weeks, or months in jail awaiting trial because they couldn't afford bail. Then and only then would the city's taxpayers exert pressure at the upper levels, forcing policemen to use better judgment than to arrest people on ridiculous catch-22 charges that they know will be thrown out of court. Black people are aware of this abuse, for a disproportionate number of blacks suffer from it constantly. But black people are powerless to remedy the situation. None of our black leaders, or should I say, so-called black leaders, seem inclined to fight City Hall over this issue, perhaps for fear of offending their white friends. Make no mistake about it, There's big money in the bail bond business, and most of it is being made at the expense of poor blacks. Donald Goines, 1973. Donald Goines, baby. Chapter 1. Obscura Mysteries. Nice name, by the way. Classic book, man. My favorite Goines book. Appreciate you reading it. Appreciate you tuning in. And no, I don't smoke cigarettes. Chapter 1. The lights on Woodward Avenue glistened brightly as the evening breeze blew away the last of the day's stifling heat. People walked the streets alone and in pairs, savoring relief from the blazing heat that had been their lot earlier in the day when the temperature had reached 110 in the shade. K-Town, I see you. Salute to you. The driver of the inconspicuous black Ford drove slowly and carefully. He didn't want any trouble before reaching his destination. Thank you, Q the polymath. That was his first mistake, driving too carefully. As he pulled towards a green light, he hesitated, then decided to speed up so that he could make the light. But as he did so, the yellow caution light came on, and again he hesitated. Touching the brake, then the gas pedal, letting up to touch the brake again, then changing his mind and stomping on the gas pedal in an attempt to beat the light. Too late. The light turned red before he had reached the center of the intersection. He cursed, then stiffened when, out of the corner of his eye, he saw the patrol car parked 30 feet or so down the cross street. Before he was completely through the intersection, he saw the squad car's headlights come on and the flashing red light. He glanced into the rearview mirror and it confirmed what he already knew. The squad car had turned the corner and was dead on his case. The thought flashed through his mind that he owed 2 overdue parking tickets. If they ran a make on him, he realized that his next stop would be city jail. He removed the pistol from the shoulder holster. He removed the pistol from the shoulder holster he always wore when going out on a job, and for a second he debated the merits of trying to outrun the law. All he needed was enough time to rid himself of the gun, but the old Ford he drove didn't have the speed to outrun them. He had an extra large motor put in the car for just that purpose, but they were just too close. He glanced in the mirror and saw that they were right on his bumper. "You better come up with something quick," he mumbled aloud, angrily. He resorted to the only thing that came to mind. He dropped the pistol to the floor and kicked it as far back under the seat as he could. The squad car pulled up beside him, and the officer on the passenger's side waved him towards the curb. As he pulled the old Ford over, he shrugged philosophically. Better that it happened now than later, he thought coldly. If it had happened on the way back, there would have been a shootout with no holds barred. The policemen got out of their car and walked towards him, and he thought how easy it would be to knock them off as he pulled his wallet out and removed his driver's license. He put on his best honest John smile and held out the license, being helpful. One of the officers took the license and walked slowly back towards the squad car. When that happened, the driver of the Ford knew that it was all over. They were calling in on him, doing exactly what he had hoped they wouldn't do. If he had been white, he reasoned, the chance of them doing that was small. All they would have done was write out a ticket and send him on his way, apologizing for detaining him. In a matter of minutes, the officer was back, but this time he had his hand on the butt of his gun. He nodded to his partner. "It seems like a couple of warrants are out for you, mister," the police informed him quietly. "It seems like a couple of warrants are out for you, mister," the police informed him quietly. His partner had moved into position on the other side of the car. The officers worked as a unit without bothering to speak. Each knew what the other expected from him. "If you don't mind, sir, please step out of the car." It was an order, but politely given. The white policeman remained polite, but there was a firmness in his voice that showed that he wouldn't take any shit. If there was one thing Chester Hines had learned when he was a young man in his early 20s, it was not to get smart with police. It was something he had learned from experience. If you acted civil with them, sometimes they would treat you fairly decently. People walked past, slowed down so they could allow their curiosity to run unchecked as they watched the policemen search the well-dressed black man in the middle of the street. One of the officers opened the car door and began probing around inside the car. Seconds later, he straightened up, and in his hand was the pistol Chester had tried to conceal. The officer pulled out his handcuffs. "Okay, buddy," he drawled. "Okay, buddy," he drawled, watching Chester's every move. "Turn around." There was no disguising excuse me. Oh my God, it's the new Morgan Freeman. And to think I was just watching The Electric Company with my boys. My grandboys, that is. Shout out to Morgan Freeman and The Electric Company. And to you too, Thibble Dibble. The officer pulled out his handcuffs. "Okay, buddy. Okay, buddy," he drawled, watching Chester's every movement. "Turn around." There was no disguising the disdain in his voice, and Chester turned slowly, daring not to make a quick movement, and extended his arms behind him. "I could listen to this all day," he says. "Salute to you, brethren." After that, Chester remained quiet, not wanting to provoke the officers of the law, and he spoke only when spoken to. When they arrived at the precinct station, he went through the mechanics of booking with a cool detachment. He had been through the procedure so often that it had become second nature to him. Irene! The name exploded in his mind like a burning flash. There one moment, gone the next. If it hadn't been for her goddamn nagging, he thought, he wouldn't be in the fix he was in. And he silently cursed the day he had met the tall, buxom showgirl. "Sorry I'm late to the party. Could you tell me what you're reading?" This is Donald Goines, White Man's Justice, Black Man's Grief. He had been on his honeymoon, he had been on his honeymoon with his first wife, a large, plump beautician who owned her own beauty shop. They were honeymooning at a black resort in Upper Michigan where he had rented a small cabin for 2 weeks of bedding, boating, and fishing until the night he ran into Irene at the resort nightclub. She had been one of the girls in the chorus line. Their eyes had met across the dimly lit room, and something intangible passed between them. That something grew until there was nothing for him to do but to kill his bride of 2 weeks. The idea wasn't new. It had been his master plan before he even married Marie, but Irene caused him to do it quicker than he had planned. Say, boy. Joey, salute. Say, boy from God of War. Coffee, my man? Get it while it's hot. The trustee stood in front of the cell. The trustee stood in front of his cell, peering in. Chester nodded his head, not bothering to speak. He watched coldly as the man poured him a cup and pushed it beneath his steel door through the little opening that was just large enough for a small bowl or for... I'm not talking shit, man. Nah, it's cool. I didn't think you were. It's cool, Hunter Edwards. Okay. He watched coldly as the man poured him a cup and pushed it beneath his steel door through the little opening that was just large enough for a small bowl of food or a cup of coffee. Today's your day in court, ain't it, my man? The trustee inquired, trying to be friendly. He put his hands on his hips, which in a woman would have been sexy, but in this thin, aging homosexual was hideously grotesque. Chester bent down and picked up his cup, then turned his back on the trustee, not bothering to answer. In the 3 days he had spent in the precinct cell, he had heard the word through the grapevine that the man was a paid informer, serving his time at the county jail instead of being sent to the farm or prison. He had busted too many people, so the prison authorities feared for his life. He was too valuable to them. God could read. Hey there, voice. Cheesy Mac? I hope I read that right. God could read the most offensive shit, and I'd still fall asleep to it, says the thibble dibble. All right. Back to this. Okay. Slowly, Chester sipped the bitter tasting coffee. The tin cup was scorching hot. As he let the coffee cool off, he made a mental note of the informer's name, Paul Robbins. That would be a name he wouldn't forget. It always paid to know the informers, especially the professional ones. Even though Chester wasn't a dope man, he liked to stay aware of such things. One never knew when it might just pay off. A tall white guard stopped in front of his cell. Chester glanced up at the turnkey. Hines, you're going over to court in about a half hour, so be ready, the turnkey said, then walked on down the long corridor, informing other men who were due in court. Chester finished his coffee, rinsed out his cup, then sat down on the edge of the iron cot and let his mind continue its idle rambling. One thing was sure, he thought, he wouldn't be coming back this way. After he went to court, he'd be taken to the county jail, and if he was lucky, he'd get a chance to sleep on a mattress that night. It might not be much, but after 3 days on the iron cot he'd been using, it would feel like a waterbed. There was no sense in fooling himself about bail either, he thought. That bitch of his, Irene, wouldn't be able to raise the money. Again, it crossed his mind that if it hadn't been for her, he wouldn't be sitting there. Her constant nagging about money had been the main reason he had taken his pistol and left the house. True, he had been planning to knock off a whiskey store that week, but it wouldn't have been that night. Now, because he'd allowed the bitch's nagging to get on his nerves, he was on his way to court to fight a concealed weapon charge, and his funky bitch wouldn't be able to raise his bond. With his record, he knew he didn't stand a chance in court. The judge would jam him. There was no doubt about it. But it could have been worse, he reasoned. It could have happened after he stuck up the store. Then his ass would have really been fucked up. Instead of just a CCW to fight, he'd have an armed robbery on his back, and that would have meant big trouble. Taking his time, Chester dressed in the clothes his wife had left downstairs for him. He didn't have a mirror, but he knew that the tight black pants fit him nicely. He still had a small waist, even though he was in his late 30s. The only things that showed his age were the circles under his eyes and the bags that formed there from keeping late hours. He put on his white shirt. Then, as he heard the guard opening the doors, he slipped on his sports coat. In minutes, the turnkey was in front of his cell. Thanks. You have a great soothing voice. Need more content like this. Have a great night, pal. And tune in on the replay. It'll always be up. The men lined up against the wall. 2 more guards came along and handcuffed the men two abreast. For something to do, Chester counted the men in the line. There were 10 other doomed asses, he told himself. As he wondered how many of them had spent half the celibate years in prison that he had served during his life of crime. The guard came back and ran a thin chain down between them, making them all chained to the same piece. God damn it, the man handcuffed to Chester began. This is the one thing I hate about this shit. They chain you up like a mother... They chain you up like you're a fucking dog or something. What did you expect? Chester replied. If they didn't take precautions and chain you, when they walked us through the tunnel, they'd have to have 50 guards out there to keep the guys from running. Well, I sure as hell wouldn't run, the man answered. I ain't did nothing. Not a goddamn thing, no way. They got me down here for nothing. These white folks just fuck over a man, if you ask me. I didn't ask you, Chester said under his breath, then decided to ignore the man. He had seen too many like him, always talking about their innocence. And besides, he didn't feel in the mood for loose conversation. His mind was too occupied with his appointment with the judge. Maybe just maybe, he hoped, the judge might give him probation. Since he hadn't been arrested in the past 2 years, it might just go in his favor. He just as quickly laughed the idea away. That was something he could forget. He'd never been that lucky before, so there was no reason to start hoping for a miracle now. Abundance, salute to you. Brother is majestic. Thank you. What's so goddamn funny? His handcuffed partner inquired, his voice full of self-righteous anger as the line of men started shuffling along. There's my favorite person, my inspiration. Proud of you and your work. Thank you for being inspired by me, and I'm being inspired by you just as well. Likewise, I'm sure, Lady Rain. Boom. 808. Chester glanced around at the heavy-set, dark-complexioned man handcuffed to him. Nothing that you'd understand, brother. Nothing at all, he said quietly. You guys, keep the fucking noise down! You're not on your way to a private dance or something, the tall, red-faced guard leading the way yelled over his shoulder. We're not on our way to a goddamn funeral either, a short, well-dressed black man yelled back at him. The group reached an elevator marked for prisoners only. The line of men stopped. Always gotta be some noisy shit around here. Dork alert. Okay. For all you dorks in here, see yourself right back outside that door. This is not for you. Man, out here in Hell Barrio, there's got to be noisy. But that's all right. We gotta keep it moving. Oh, come on, stop it. See, I gotta pause for the cause just because I can't be recording nothing that's coming from the outside into this microphone. This microphone picks up everything. All right, let me try recording some more. Sees all the time. What's good? I see you. Thank you, my friend, for being an executive producer. And of course, to all the other executive producers here up in the house, I appreciate you all. Without y'all, I couldn't do this as good or as fast. Thank you kindly. Keep up all the good work, says C's all the time. Okay. The group reached an elevator marked for prisoners only. The line of men stopped. 2 more white guards joined the first group. Then they began the job of loading the men into the small elevator. The men on the front of the chain went in first and walked around inside the elevator a tiny elevator, making a complete circle and stopping in front of the elevator door. The men were loaded into the tight space like cattle. The guards were no better off. They had to squeeze inside themselves. Get off my goddamn foot, motherfucker! Someone yelled. Someone in the rear yelled angrily. No sooner than the elevator doors closed when the tightly packed bodies sucked up all the available oxygen. Chester fought. Chester fought to breathe. He thought he would suffocate inside the tiny space. He raised his head high. Excuse me, folks. He raised his head high, sucking at the stale air that seemed thick enough to cut with a knife. The odors from the unwashed bodies filled his nostrils, and he decided to hold his breath. Better to suffocate, he reasoned, than to die from an overload of funk. The elevator finally stopped. The guard stepped out quickly. They, too, wanted to escape from the strong odor and lack of air. Hey everyone, I am late. Navy Knave says, peace. You're right on time and the place to be. The walk through the tunnel was quick. Every now and then they would pass another guard strategically placed so that the chain of men would be under constant observation. There were desperate men in the small group of prisoners. Some of them were fighting murder charges, and any opportunity to escape would set them in violent motion. The precautions that the guards took the precautions that the guards took showed that they anticipated. I had to wait a second. This is Ralph Reed's Raw, after all, huh? And apparently this is my rawest episode yet. The precautions that the guards took. Salute to you, Junior. The precautions that the guards took showed that they anticipated all forms of trouble and meant to handle it if it should jump off. When they came out of the tunnel, the men were separated from the chain that held them all together. They were still handcuffed, two abreast though. As they were released from the cabin, they were led off to small bullpens, depending upon what judge they were going before. The petty cases, misdemeanors, and traffic violations were excuse me. The petty cases, misdemeanors, and traffic violations were separated from what they termed the hardened crooks, the violent men. One second, folks. The noise. I swear I hate this fucking place. It couldn't be quiet to save my life out here. It just can't. It won't. Oh, would you please finish? God, Lord. Chester studied the faces around him. Some of them couldn't hide the fear in their eyes. They were terrified, and one could see the fear jumping out of their eyes. Their legs shook uncontrollably. One young boy had pissed on himself. Whenever anyone happened to catch his eye, he looked away or glanced down at the floor. We need to stop giving porcupines guns. That NWA song suddenly comes to mind somehow. Did you hear about that? Oh, I can't even say it. Anyway, whenever anyone happened to catch us, okay, the guard pushed Chester and his chained partner over toward one of the bullpen doors. He took out his keys and unlocked the handcuffs, then opened the large steel door. He beckoned for them to go inside. You boys know the routine, so hop to it. He slammed the door behind them. Before Chester could find a place to sit down, the strong, heavy steel door opened again, and another two men came stumbling in. Keep your fucking hands off me, Screw! One of the men cursed over his shoulder at the guard who had pushed him. The two small benches The two small benches inside the bullpen were already occupied, so Chester, after wiping off a spot on the floor, sat down. He knew that he knew that he probably had a 2-hour wait before court opened. They always brought the prisoners over early in the morning, at least 2 hours before court convened. Chester wrinkled his nose and moved. He had sat down too close to the piss hole, a small hole in the floor that the men had used for a toilet. The smell coming from it was enough to turn a person's stomach. Around the small hole was dried vomit that someone had had the decency to try to deposit into the hole instead of just anywhere in the bullpen. There were spots in the corners where some men hadn't been so considerate, and at that moment, another started to piss up against the wall. The men sitting near him cursed loudly, but the man continued to piss. The urine ran down the wall, and a small stream of it began to flow across the floor. You better hope, nigga, that piss of yours has eyes, 'cause if it gets on me, I'm kicking you in your ass. A short, young black man growled at the older man who had pissed against the wall. The young man continued, You can damn well bet they got you to the right place, you sorry motherfucker. He moved away from the spot where he had been sitting. The small stream of urine hadn't reached him, but it was getting within a couple of feet from where he had been sitting. He paced up and down the bullpen, glaring at the man who had pissed. I should make you get down on your knees and lick that shit up. You don't give a fuck, no way. It don't make you no difference that other men have to come behind you and use the same fucking place. No! The more he talked, the angrier he became. The large muscles in his arm jumped, and from the looks of him, he was quite capable of doing just what he threatened. Now wait a minute, Blood. I don't mean no harm, the drunk said, trying to justify his action. No harm, my ass, the young Blood replied. It didn't even... God, Lord, what the hell is this? Shit. It don't even cross your mind. It don't even cross your mind that the men that come in here after us might have to sit in that funky piss of yours, you ornery motherfucker. Ah, Lord. You could have walked over and pissed in the hole, just like the rest of the men. But no, hell no, you had to piss on the fucking floor. Blood stopped in front of the drunk. You know what you are, man? You're a self-centered, cruel, no-good bastard whose own mammy don't want him. Wait a minute, Blood. Don't talk about my poor old ma, the drunk said. Before he could add another word, the young man slapped him twice across the face viciously. That better not be a train. The sound reverberated through the bullpen and empty halls. Now, you motherfucker, Take your shirt off and wipe up that shit. The young man didn't crack a smile. His eyes were cold and his lips were pulled down in a violent sneer. The other men fell silent. When they finally spoke, they spoke in whispers as though they were afraid they might bring violence down on their own heads. Chester grinned as he watched the man wipe up the piss with his shirt, but soon grew tired of watching and looked inward, filled with his own worries. Chapter 2. The sound of the key in the lock caused all of the men in the bullpen to glance up at the door. The door swung open, revealing a guard, clipboard in hand. He stayed in the hallway, a few feet from the threshold, to avoid the bullpen smell as he called out names. Rufus Johnson, Billy Jones, John Castor, Donald Warren, James Saylor, Jim Jackson, Tony Townsend, Tony Townsend. He continued calling names in the board's slightly nasal monotone, and as he did so, the men formed a line at the door. Chester was the last to be called, and he formed the end of the line. And followed the men out into the hallway. Guards stood at each end of the corridor, holding shotguns as the prisoners were led down the short hall. The guard that opened their door was the only one who didn't have a weapon of any kind. He led the men up to a huge oak door where he stopped and removed his keys. When he opened the door for the men, he made sure they went in single file. Chester blinked at the harsh light in the courtroom and peered around curiously. He had been in and out of courtrooms all his life, but he never got over his fear of them. The black-robed men who sat up high on the benches, dispensing their so-called justice, filled him with awe. It was not a feeling of reverence or of wonder caused by something sublime. It was a feeling of terror inspired by the raw power that these hypocrites held over the helpless black men who came before them. He didn't fear the men themselves. He knew well that they were insignificant, even while recognizing how insidious they could sometimes be. He feared the power of life and death these men held in their hands. Half of them were too old to keep up with the times. They tried to beat down the complexities of the 70s with their gavels, with their 20s and 30s spawned attitudes with raw power. The courtroom was full of people. The seats were filled with men in custody and with people who came to watch the wretched human beings squirm before the all-powerful judges. The line that Chester was in seemed endless as he stared over the heads of most of the black men in front of him. He started counting. There were 30 men in front of him, and out of that 30, only 3 were white. 2 of the white men had the look of the derelict about them. The line moved faster than Chester thought it would. It seemed like only minutes before he was almost in front of the judge. The black man he had been chained to as they came through the tunnel stepped before the judge. As his charge was read off, Chester had to fight back a grin. A large, hardened black woman got up and came forward, pushing a young girl, 11 years old, down the aisle in front of her. Chester examined the young girl closely, take the braids out of her hair and let it down, and she definitely looked older. Her young breasts were large and firm. She was overripe, even if she was underage. "Is this the child that the accused is supposed to have molested?" the judge asked as he leaned down to get a better view of the young girl's breasts. Of the young girl's breasts. Chester watched the gleam in the old gray-haired judge's eyes and knew without a doubt what the man was thinking. How was it? He'd probably give up his front seat in hell for a shot of that young black pussy. Chester reflected coldly as he watched the proceedings. "Ain't no suppose it to it," the older woman screamed hotly. "I came from work, and when I entered the front door, I could hear this child screaming her head off. Right then and there, I dropped them bags I've been carrying and run to help her. At first I'm thinking the child done burnt herself or something, but when I reached the back of the house, I see this bastard with his pants down and this goddamn thing in his hand." As she related the incident, her voice rose several octaves until she was almost screeching at the judge. The judge didn't bother to reprimand her for speaking out or swearing. He just nodded his head, then set a $5,000 bond on the man. As the accused tried to explain, one of the court-appointed policemen rushed him away from the judge. And to answer this DJ Envy and Caesar Pena LLC shit, free Puff. Cassie was trash on the mic, except other men's mics. Well, how about this? You, your boy Caesar Pena, and Puff could all share a bottle of baby oil. Now vamos, all right? FOH. Immediately, if not sooner, asshole. I don't know what's up with this live, but lately, YouTube been letting dudes feel themselves on here. YouTube, I hold you responsible for this dumbass shit taking place right now. Douche rag shit. The courtroom had fallen silent as the woman spoke. Now, with that case out of the way, the judge paused to drink a glass of water, which was poured by an attractive young white girl who kept going back and forth, bringing him the different files on the men and women who had to appear before him. While they waited for the next case to come up, the people in the courtroom gossiped. Chester wiped the sweat from his brow as he stepped in front of the judge. Since the baby raper only got a $5,000 bond, he reasoned, he stood a good chance of getting a low bond. He was nowhere near as bad as the man who had preceded him. He waited silently while the judge read off his record. It took a while because he had a long record. "What were you doing with a gun in your car, Mr. Hines?" Before Chester could reply, the judge continued. "From your record, sir, you're not supposed to even have a weapon at your home, let alone in your car." He stared down silently for a brief moment. "I see by your record, you once killed a man," he said, holding up his hand to cut off Chester's reply. "Yes, I could see here where you were released on justified homicide. But if you hadn't had a gun on that occasion, you wouldn't have taken a man's life." "If I wouldn't have had a gun at that time, Your Honor, I wouldn't be standing here right now. I'd be dead. In the short silence that followed, Chester decided that if he were ever going to get anything said, he had he had better start saying it now. Your Honor, if the court will allow, uh, Your Honor, if the court will allow, I've been just recently married and I've just gotten a good job. If you would give me a personal bond, sir, I'm sure I'll be able to afford the money to hire me a lawyer for this case. I'm sure you would hire yourself a good lawyer, Mr. Hines. Your kind of man always seems to hire the best lawyer around, the judge stated sharply, then added, But from your record, sir, it would be a travesty of justice if I were to allow you out on a personal bond. $10,000 with two securities, the judge stated, then hit the block with his small gavel. His way of informing the court guards that he was finished with the case and was ready for the next. While Chester had stood before the judge, the court officers had been busy. There was a new line of men behind Chester, all waiting for their chance in court. Chester stared up at the judge, dumbfounded. He hadn't expected the stiff decision. It was too much. He'd never get out on bond now. Even if his wife came up with the money, she'd never be able to raise the two securities. He turned around and searched the sea of faces in the courtroom. His wife and kids were sitting 3 rows back. Tears were rolling down her cheeks as she stared at him. She had been in enough courtrooms to know just what the judge had done. There were few black men who could come up with the $1,000 cash it would take. Plus, he needs someone to put up the house for. Plus, he needs someone to put up a house for one of the securities. It was impossible. And his wife believed in her heart the judge knew that when he had set the that the judge knew that when he had set the bond. An officer grabbed Chester's arm firmly and guided him from the courtroom. He walked along in a slight daze. He walked along in a slight daze. It had happened. Even though he had thought that it would be hard, he hadn't really given up hope of making a small bond, something that he might have been able to raise even if his wife had to sell the car. When they reached the corridor, he jerked his arm from the policeman's grip. God damn it! I can walk! You don't have to shove me! You don't have to shove me! You don't have to shove me! He yelled belligerently into the officer's face. Just take it easy, the officer said lightly. I didn't set your bond, and I'm just doing my job. Okay, just don't shove me, Chester said as he regained control. How's chances of me seeing my wife and kids for a minute, officer? The officer looked at him slowly. He was young, but since the 2 years he had worked in the courtroom, he had seen all kinds of men. To him, Chester had gotten a raw deal. He saw dozens of CCW cases come through the courtroom, and he knew that had Chester been white, he'd have been given a small bond or released on his own personal word. If not a personal bond, it wouldn't have been higher than a $500 bond, something a man could raise without ruining himself. It was a cold world, the guard thought, and if you were black, it was more than cold. It was pure hell. The guard thought about Chester's having killed a man before, but he reasoned that Chester had been tried and released, so there was no reason for him to have a pay for it now. But From what he knew about the court system, he'd be willing to bet that every time Chester ended up in court, he'd still be paying for that not guilty verdict. This way, the guard finally said, and led him down another corridor. They walked in silence until the guard stopped in front of another bullpen. On this steel door, there was a wire window where the prisoners could talk to their lawyers or other visitors. I'll try to get your wife back here for a few minutes before they take you over to the county jail. Just have patience, the guard said as he opened the door. Chester entered the small cell and glanced around. It was identical to the one he had been in earlier, only this one didn't have the strong odor the other one had, and it was smaller. There were only 4 men inside, and each one stayed off to himself. A tall white man paced back and forth. Each time footsteps were heard in the hallway, he'd rush to the front of the cell and try to see out of the small wire window. Once he yelled out to a passing guard, "Get me a bondsman back here, Mac, and I'll give you $50. And I'll give you $50. Finally, the guard arrived, leading the way for Irene. She followed the guard, pulling 2 small girls along behind her. Both of the little girls were crying. Chester pushed his face against the wire window. Hi, baby. Hi, baby. Looks like you're going to have to make it without your old man for a while, he said casually, trying to make it easy for her. The kids were too small to see their father, and both of them started to yell when they heard his voice. Irene bent down and lifted one of them up. After a few seconds, in which Chester tried to kiss the little girl through the wire, she lifted the other one up. They talked for a few moments, but there was nothing Chester could tell her to do. It was all cut and dried. Listen, baby, ain't no sense worrying. I'm on my way to prison anyway, so whatever time I do in the county jail now will be just the less time I'll have to do in prison. It ain't dead time no more like it used to be. Now, they give a man all the time he spends in the county jail. So just keep your head up. She tried to grin at him. I ain't worried, baby. Things might work out better than you think. You'll go before another judge for sentence, so you might just get a break. That's what the guard says. After you spend some time in the county jail, it will all go in your favor. Don't fool yourself, Irene. All these fucking ass judges are just alike. The black ones are just as bad as the white ones, or worse. I don't know if I'd rather take my chances with a white one instead of those ass-kissing black ones. They're so scared that their white friends might think they're giving the black man a break. They lean over backwards to give a nigga some time. They lean over backwards to give a nigga some time. No, baby. With my record, the shit's in the fan. Well, honey, it could have been worse, couldn't it? She asked. They both knew what she meant. They kept no secrets from each other. She knew he was a stick-up man and professional killer. It could have been worse. At his age, he couldn't stand one of those 20 to 25 prison sentences. He shook his head in agreement. He had told her many times that if he got busted in a robbery, he'd hold court in the streets before he let the police take him on an armed robbery charge. Yeah, baby, it could have been much worse, so that's one reason why I'm thankful. It's only a concealed weapon charge, and the most I'm looking forward to is maybe 2 years. I'll be out sometime next year, maybe. The guard came back down the corridor. Well, miss, I'm afraid that's as long as I can allow. I've got too many other prisoners to worry about today, so I'll have to take you back up front. The tall white man tapped Chester on the shoulder. Hey, fella, how about having your wife give my name to a bondsman for me? Hey, fella, how about having your wife give my name to a bondsman for me? If she does, I'll send up 50. The tall white man tapped Chester on the shoulder. Hey, fella, how about having your wife give my name to a bondsman for me? If she does, I'll send up $50 for you. I'll swear. What's your name, buddy? I'll give it to her, even though I know goddamn well you ain't gonna send me no goddamn $50. Chester gave her the inmate's name and told her to try and send a bondsman back there. Immediately, Irene turned and stared angrily at the young guard who had tapped her on the shoulder. Before she could say something nasty, Chester intervened. It's all right, honey. If he had wanted to, he could have stopped you from coming back here to see me. He's all right, and I appreciate the favor he did for me by allowing you to get the little bit of time he did. Now don't forget, he said, speaking loud enough for the other men to hear. Be sure to send the bondsman back here for Edward Binns. Be sure to tell him to come as soon as possible. Okay, Daddy, she replied, then grabbed the little girl's hands and brushed past the waiting officer. He followed behind, shrugging his shoulders. It was something he was used to. The women always seemed to act as if it was his fault. As he followed her, prisoners called out to him to allow them the use of the phone or for other things. From buying them a cup of coffee to find a bondsman for them, he only shrugged and kept them. From buying them a cup of coffee to finding a bondsman for them, he only shrugged and kept on walking. After Irene left, Chester settled back to wait until they came to take him back across the street. Edward Binns stopped and inquired. Do you really think your wife will do that for me? I mean, do you think she'll take the time to find a bondsman? For a brief second, Chester studied the man. He didn't bother to tell him that it wouldn't take her a minute to stop in the hallway and approach one of the dozens of bondsmen who ran up and down the corridor. Yeah, man. I told her about the $50 you promised me, so she'll be sure and send one. But what about the 50? When am I supposed to get that? Next week on your payday or on some other bullshit like that? No, nothing like that. No, nothing like that, the man said, reaching in his pocket and pulling out his money. See? I have it here. I'll be sure to give it to you. In fact, I'll be damn glad to give it to you if she sends that bondsman. Chester grinned. He hadn't believed the man at first, and now he couldn't believe the man was that square. How did you happen to get locked up, Ed? He asked out of curiosity. It's all a mistake. It's a non-support case, but actually, they got the wrong Edward Binns. They want an Edward Bims, not Binns. But that fucking judge wouldn't even listen, so I didn't have the time to get in touch with my lawyer or bondsman. Chester laughed loudly. Yeah, man, I know what you mean. That goddamn judge ain't got the time or sense to listen to whatever anyone might have to say. He thinks he's God or something. Edward Binns. Edward Binns? Is there an Edward Binns in there? A short, white-haired man asked through the window. Yes! Edward yelled as he rushed toward the door. I'm the man you're looking for! Chester moved close. Chester moved close to the door, protecting his $50 investment in case Irene had sent the man back. A young colored woman said you needed a bondsman, sir. Is that correct? The other men inside the cell watched coldly as Chester collected the easy $50. Some of them frowned, but it didn't make them. Some of them frowned, but it didn't make a damn bit of difference to Chester as he collected his money and took his time folding it up so that they could see him doing it. He laughed. He laughed harshly at the frowns, but it was part of life. A few nights ago, if he had this much money in his pocket, he wouldn't have been pressed to go. He wouldn't have been pressed to go out into the streets to commit a crime. He wouldn't have been pressed to go out into the streets to commit a crime. Now, here in jail, he ran into the money without even thinking about it. It was a gift, a bird nest on the ground. Oh well, he reasoned. It would make his day. It would make his. It would make his stay in the county jail a lot more pleasant. Now he wouldn't have to worry about cigarettes or candy or other small things that made prison bearable. The sound of the guards coming, carrying chains, brought him back to reality. All right, folks. I'm stopping it there. In a couple of days' time, I'll be back to read Chester, Chapter 3, Chapter 4, whatever else. I want to give a shout to all you folks that are tuned in. And I want to give a shout out to the executive producers. Now, let me just mark this up real quick. I'm going to call this one simply Justice here, so it don't take up too much space. Justice. Yeah, Justice 1. Okay. Justice 1. Save project. Get it all out of here, right? Okay, folks. Thank you for being here. Even the Wade Word ones. I see y'all were bored. That's unique because that does not happen here on Ralph Reads Raw. Now then, big shout to the executive producers that make the United Ronin Networks as special as it is. I love you all while I cooked food. Now, usually I say, let the reading commence, but quite frankly, I was kind of heated at the shit coming in. Good night, all. See you next time. All right, Navy Nave, thank you for checking in the game. I hope to see you next time. I'll be back in a couple of days. All right, for another edition of Ralph Reads Raw and all that. Now then, to the members of the crew, it goes a little something like this, y'all. Just Being Kiki, Nana James, Tamika Lucy, Cedric Cartier, Alasia Ross, Eric Wright, Say K, Danielle Cunningham, D. Eagle Galloway, Action Jackson, 2104, K-Town, B to B, Alicia B, J Bobo, Narderwick, Maya Jackson, Schoolby, Anika Evans, Rashidi Smith, Renasia Cornish, Supreme Goddess Nikki, Lovey Parker, Marvin Kuntz, P Money, Chris Johnson, Stephen Wade, Glenda Harper, K. Marie Billingsley, Queen, Maria da Silva, T Money Money, 704 Liquor House, Talk Network, Papa Perk, Anaya Drake, Sherelle 5150, Damian Irving, Sweet D, Cynthia, Lost Roads, Keith Woods, Sees All the Time, Trey Noel, Tawidi, Tequila Green, Mr. Light, Goose Jack, Desjuan Manuel. The fourth, Lady Rain, 808, Pretty Ricky 22, Desmond Thomas, Dariel Carrington, Marcus Valentine, Kyla Easler, and the mighty Easler family. Bia Lee, 007, Michael Woodford, Pat Master OST, Pat Master OST, Anthony Leach, Calm, Tama, Mr. Fulltime, Brian Latham, Mr. T, John Logic and Friends. Great work as usual, says Lady Rain and Rich Alex. Great read, bro. Thank you. And please pardon the little quips, the little mistakes I make. This is Ralph Reads Raw. I'm recording on the microphone so I can later make a stylized version of this. So if you hear me constantly stuttering and all of this and that, it's done by design. Obscura Mysteries, again, great name. Salute. Appreciate the read, and I appreciate y'all listening in. Now, folks, tell a friend to tune in to TURN, the United Ronin Networks, and pardon everything suddenly being left, all mirrored. It never used to be like this. Whatever. It is what it is until I could do something about that later on. But until I do, this is what it's going to be in the place to be. Thank y'all for joining me, the PEZ, to all of my old friends that still call me Pez, and for all your folks who are executive producers to this channel. I am fully indebted to y'all. And to the rest of y'all, please join the channel or tell a friend to tune in to TURN, the United Ronin Networks. We are Ronin. I will see you folks on the next edition of Ralph Reads Raw. Stay sexy. It becomes you. Peace.